Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to be tackling a pretty wild topic, Agenda 21.
Oh, yeah. This one's a doozy.
Yeah. You've probably seen the headlines, UN plot to control the world, sustainable development is a lie. Is there any truth to this?
Well, Agenda 21 is a real document. It came out of that 1992 UN Earth Summit.
Right.
Focused on sustainable development.
Right.
But how some people interpret it, let's just say it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Okay, so we have what sounds like a pretty reasonable plan for global cooperation on big issues, poverty, the environment.
Yeah.
But then there's this whole other side that sees Agenda 21 as like a blueprint for global domination.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we even begin to unpack that?
Well, I think the conspiracy theory, it really hinges on this idea that sustainable development is a code word for control.
Okay.
And proponents of this theory, they believe that the UN is using Agenda 21 to manipulate governments and strip individuals of their freedoms, all under the guise of saving the planet.
So instead of tackling things like pollution and poverty...
They're trying to create some kind of eco-authoritarian regime.
That's the basic premise,
Yeah.
They believe that the UN wants to dictate everything from where you live to what you eat, all in the name of sustainability.
What does this look like in their minds? What are people afraid of?
Well, one of the biggest fears is the loss of private property.
Okay.
The theory claims that Agenda 21 will lead to governments seizing land under the guise of environmental protection.
Oh, so you're picturing black helicopters swooping down to confiscate your backyard for a community garden.
Exactly. It plays into that deep-seated fear of government overreach,
Right.
particularly when it comes to property rights.
And it doesn't stop there. I've heard some pretty wild claims about Agenda 21 and population control.
Oh yeah, some proponents go so far as to say that Agenda 21 is a roadmap for reducing the global population through forced sterilization, abortion, even euthanasia.
Wow.
They'll often use dramatic imagery like overcrowded cities, depleted resources,
Yeah.
to fuel those fears. So we've got land grabs, population control. What else is on this Agenda 21 conspiracy theory bingo card?
Oh, you got the usual suspects, restrictions on travel, limitations on gun ownership, censorship of dissenting voices, anything that can be framed as a loss of personal liberty.
Wow. It's like they took every dystopian sci-fi trope and crammed it into one giant conspiracy theory.
Right.
But let's be real here. Is there any evidence to support these claims?
Right.
Does Agenda 21 actually say any of this?
No, that's where things get interesting. If you actually read Agenda 21, and I encourage everyone to do so, you'll find a document that focuses on international cooperation and sustainable development.
Yeah.
There's nothing about forced sterilization or land confiscation or any of those extreme claims.
So it's all just a massive misinterpretation. People are reading way too much into a UN document.
Well, while the claims themselves are unfounded, I do think that they highlight some very real anxieties that people have. We live in a time of rapid globalization, climate change, technological advancements. It's understandable that people feel uncertain about the future.
I can see that. When the world feels chaotic, it's tempting to latch on to those simple explanations.
Right.
Even if those explanations are based on fear and misinformation.
Exactly.
But how do we reconcile these very real anxieties with the fact that Agenda 21, the document itself, doesn't actually support the conspiracy theory?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we'll delve into deeper as we continue this deep dive. But for now, let's shift gears a little bit and explore the psychology behind conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Why are these narratives so appealing, and what makes people susceptible to them? Because understanding that, I think, is key to addressing the spread of misinformation.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how these conspiracy theories, while they lack, solid evidence, they often tap into very real anxieties that people have.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth taking a closer look at the psychology behind this phenomenon.
Okay.
Because it's not just about misunderstanding a document. Right.
It's about something much deeper.
So what makes people susceptible to these kinds of beliefs? Why do some folks see like a sinister plot where others just see a plan for global cooperation?
Well, one key factor is distrust of authority.
Okay.
And this could be distrust of government institutions, experts, academics.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of they're not telling us the whole truth,
Right.
There's a hidden agenda at play.
It's like that classic X-Files line, trust no one. But in this case, it's not aliens, it's the UN.
Exactly. And that distrust is often amplified by the sheer volume of information that we're bombarded with every day.
Right.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, lost in a sea of just conflicting narratives.
For sure.
That's where conspiracy theories can come in.
Okay.
They offer a sense of order, a simple explanation,
Right.
in a world that feels very complex.
It's like trying to find a single puzzle piece in this jumbled mess. You're more likely to grab onto something that looks like it fits, even if it's from a totally different puzzle. Yeah, that's a great analogy. And in the case of Agenda 21, that simple explanation often boils down to resisting any form of global cooperation or environmental regulation.
Right.
It becomes this rallying cry against perceived threats to individual liberty.
But wouldn't that make the world even more chaotic if everyone just rejected any attempt at global cooperation?
Logically, yes.
Right.
But conspiracy theories don't always operate on logic.
Right.
They often appeal to emotion, to fear, to suspicion.
Okay.
And when those emotions are strong enough, they can override our rational thinking.
Yeah, it's like that feeling you get when you're walking alone at night and you hear a noise.
Right.
Your heart starts racing, your mind jumps to conclusions,
Exactly.
even if it's just a stray cat
Right.
rummaging in the trash.
Fear can make us see patterns where none exist, connect dots that shouldn't be connected.
Right.
And when those fears are reinforced by like-minded individuals,
Yeah.
it creates this really powerful echo chamber
Right.
that's hard to break out of.
So it's not just about the individual psychology, it's also about the social dynamics of these groups. They
Right.
create their own reality, their own set of facts. And anyone who challenges those beliefs is seen as like an outsider,
Yeah.
a threat to their shared identity.
Exactly. And that's why it's so difficult to debunk conspiracy theories. It's not just about presenting facts and evidence.
Right.
You're essentially asking people to question their entire worldview, their sense of belonging, their understanding of how the world works.
It's like telling someone they've been wearing their shoes on the wrong feet their entire life.
Yeah.
It's not just about correcting a mistake, it's about challenging their whole sense of self.
That's a powerful image. And it highlights the importance of empathy when dealing with people who hold these beliefs.
Okay.
You know, we need to understand that they're not necessarily stupid or malicious. They're often just scared, confused, looking for answers in a world that feels increasingly complex and uncertain.
So how do we reach those folks?
Yeah.
How do we bridge that gap between those who see a conspiracy and those who see a plan for, a better future?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one we'll explore further as we wrap up this deep dive.
We've been talking about the Agenda 21 conspiracy theory, how it takes this idea of sustainable development and turns it into this fear-mongering narrative about global control. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the role of language in misinterpretation.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting. A lot of the fear surrounding Agenda 21 stems from taking phrases out of context.
Right.
Twisting them to fit a pre-existing narrative.
It's like one of those movie trailers that makes a rom-com look like a horror film.
Exactly. You take a few words here, a sentence there, and all of a sudden this document about international cooperation sounds like a manifesto for world domination.
And social media doesn't really help, does it?
No, not at all.
It feels like those misinterpretations just spread like wildfire online.
Absolutely. Algorithms prioritize engagement. And nothing drives engagement like fear and outrage.
Right.
So you have these distorted snippets of Agenda 21 circulating online, constantly being reinforced by like-minded individuals.
Yeah.
And it creates this self-perpetuating cycle of misinformation.
So how do we break that cycle? How do we encourage people to actually read the document and not just rely on, these bite-sized out of context snippets?
Well, it's not easy, but I think one important step is promoting media literacy.
Okay.
We need to teach people how to evaluate sources, recognize bias, and distinguish between credible information and misinformation.
Like giving people a BS detector for the internet.
Exactly.
Right.
And part of that is encouraging critical thinking, asking questions, digging deeper, not just taking things at face value.
So it's not about telling people what to think.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools to think for themselves.
Precisely, because ultimately we can't force anyone to change their beliefs. But we can empower them to be more discerning, more thoughtful consumers of information. And hopefully that will lead to more nuanced and productive conversations about these complex issues.
Well said. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. But this is a topic that could definitely fill, several more deep dives.
For sure.
So if you're interested in learning more, make sure to check out the links in our show notes.
Yes, definitely.
And as always, we want to hear from you, our listeners.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Agenda 21? Have you encountered this conspiracy theory in your own life?
Yeah, let us know.
And do you think these anxieties about global control are justified? Share your thoughts in the comments. Connect with us on social media. We're always eager to hear different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep those minds open and those critical thinking skills sharp.
Yes.
There's a whole world of information out there,
Yeah.
and it's up to us to navigate it wisely.